I'm Sary Beidas. I practice internal medicine, and I'm also an infectious disease physician and an informatician as well. I have been working in informatics for years, and then I decided to focus on education of informatics. Based on my experience working in a big hospital center and working with thousands of, whether it's nurses, physicians, students, and the difficulties that they typically tend to have when thinking about informatics. So this is really about computational thinking practices, but the talk today has very little technical stuff. Unless you engage me, this is going to be to share with you some of the nuts and bolts of working through that. Orange Park is a community hospital. It's around 300 beds. And 2 years ago, they decided to begin opening up a residency in internal medicine. And that's when I decided to join them. And the motivation to join them was, okay, here's a new residency that is opening up. I can really do some things in it. I've been in education for 35 years, and I've had opportunities of doing things, and I figured out that would be a great time to do so. So this is the hospital, and this here is the internal medicine clinic, and this is where I live most of the time. This is where the residents work with me. And the focus of what we're going to be talking about this morning is those 4 areas. They may not come into this exact sequence. I will try and tell you when I'm jumping back and forth between one and the other. We're going to define computational thinking. I'm going to share with you what the residents think about computational thinking. And then what are some of the tools that I use to help them get there. This slide is one of the workhorse slides for this talk. Weintraub at the University of Chicago, he and his colleagues have put together a very nice summary in 2016 on what computational thinking practices are. Wang in 2006, she initially proposed the definition. And if you begin reading through 2006 on, there's the STEM, there's the STEAM, in government, science, technology, engineering movement. And schools and universities have been struggling really how to teach this stuff and how to develop the workforce for it. So Weintraub put it back into 4 simple areas. I can't say they're simple, but into 4 simple things that classifying things so that we can actually begin understanding what this is all about. Data and visualizations, system theory, computational problem solving means solving problems from a computational sense. So the computer scientists understand this very well. But we as docs or nurses or students, we struggle through this. And then finally, modeling and simulation. And I'm going to focus on the slide, on the graphic that is up there. So I've heard you talk this morning about influenza. Well, guess what? We did a quality improvement project for influenza, and this kind of puts these things into perspective. Our quality improvement for influenza, we worked with the American College of Physicians. They have a QI project, and we worked with them for 3 to 4 months, developed the piece. We didn't use any virtual stuff. We really used our hands most of the time, but we used some of these principles. So whenever you want to do something and you want to call it computational thinking practices and want to work with residents, it has to be relevant. It has to be relevant to those guys, because if it's not, you actually lose their attention very quickly. And so everything that I do with them, and I try to explicitly come back to these 4 points and say, here's why you're doing this, or here, why this is important for you during your 3 years of residency. Here's how this will impact you. So for example, within this graph, you think about systems theory. Well, how easy is it, or how difficult is it to actually implement and, to help your patients or to help improve the vaccination rates? We started out at somewhat around 35% for flu vaccine and pneumovax. And by the end of the 3 months, what you can see is we only went up to around 50%. So there was a 20% improvement. Do you know how difficult that is to get those 20%? It is hard sweat and labor. And you know what? I don't think I can sustain that increase. I'll tell you, when I go in the rooms with my, and see the patients with the residents, I literally fight with the patients. So that's the second point to me, is the shared decision making. So this is like a step-by-step. You're working with the residents, but systems theory comes into this. I have to convince the administration, for example, that I would like to have some posters in the rooms. Do you think it's easy to get posters in the rooms? CDC gives you posters for free. These are 3 by 2 feet posters. But when you try to put it into a clinic that is owned by an entity, that might not be easy. The entity has its own half-page immunization things, sheets that they want to put behind the door. They don't want to put it clear to the patients so that when they come in, they actually are reading, they're actually learning something. The nurses, you have to work with the nurses and convince them that you want them on this initiative. So you provide the nurse. Now you develop a chief vaccination officer and you assign it to the nurse. So there's all these different entities or things that you have to work through in order to get that systems theory thing. Data and visualizations. You have to sit with the residents and teach them about data. You have to show them what data is. What are the types of data? How do they put things into a small little spreadsheet? You think we know this intuitively, but I can share with you that the residents actually don't know this. And sometimes we tend to believe that they know how to use spreadsheets, they know how to put the data in there according to, whether it's categorical, whether it's continuous data, and how to actually ask the right questions. And then finally, computational problem solving in there. And I have this dice with me. And the thing that I try to help them understand is that, I say, okay, here we've got this lovely dice. We throw it down and we get a number. Something comes up. And you ask the question, what is the probability of that? And they very quickly tell you it's 1 in 6. And then I say, well, how do we take this and actually make a computer? How do we develop this into a simulation that we can ask we can get some answers and begin asking some questions? So this may be a very simplistic way for simulation, but nevertheless, it captures their attention as to what the potential for this is. So you ask, what is my motivation for doing all of this? First, I enjoy this. That's the primary reason. But I think the other important reason is I constantly tell our residents, I don't know how many of you feel or have this feeling, but probably we constantly hear that in the next 10 years, you probably won't need as much physicians. So I've heard you also say this morning that we have a big shortage of physicians that is looming. Is that true in 5 to 10 years? My feeling is that we as physicians, we have to retool ourselves. Just like at the turn of the century, the mechanics and everybody else had to retool themselves. Just like when the internet came, the journalists had to retool themselves so that they become relevant. And at the time, if you recall, in around 2000 or so, they still had not believed that that's going to happen. So we have to retool ourselves. There's all this technology. There's the virtual reality it's absolutely something that is fascinating, and it's going to have a lot of applications in medicine. There's telemedicine that is, Kaiser had said that they're moving most of their patient primary care encounters to telemedicine. There's the sensors that are coming in, the artificial intelligence. Watson is being used. I own some stock in IBM, and they send me their annual book, and I was very surprised to see in their annual, booklets how much Watson has permeated into medicine. This is not only for oncology, this is for everything. And as Watson becomes miniaturized, in the next couple of years, it'll be on our iPhone or on our Android. We are stuck also, I heard this morning, we are also stuck in 20th century education mode. So regardless where I go and teach, and along the East Coast, I've worked in several different systems that are related to educating physicians, and they all are really pretty much the same, including the current system that I'm in. It is 20th century. All the different principles that we learned, we are teaching them back again to students and to residents. So should we change? The big piece is why residents need this, besides the retooling for their practices. They all have to do a QI project. They all have to do a research project. And so I always come back to them and say, okay, you want to do a research project. Let's begin thinking about a question. And once they develop the question, then they have to figure out how are they going to collect the data. First, obviously, they have to write a protocol. They have to submit it for approval. But then they have to collect the data. They have to know what are the variables that they are asking. So these are just some of the things I think that are surfacing up. We say technology is our solution, but also from last year in the Mayo Clinic, there was a big article on physician burnout and how technology is actually leading to that. We have a suicide problem in the country, and my theory is technology probably has a lot to do with that. We are an individualistic society, and more we are looking at our telephones all day long without talking to anyone. This is the resident perception of what's going on. Now, when we say how aware are they of computational thinking, I didn't ask the residents, or I didn't put to the residents, do you understand what computational thinking is? So I didn't provide them with a definition. I don't really know what they're thinking of when I ask that question. But up here, what you can see is that those who strongly agree are not many. And when I ask them if they've previously done any work in statistics or in data analysis and stuff, their answer, again, for the most part, is, some of them may have, but most of them haven't really worked to any degree with analyzing data or working with stuff. And we're all enamored by the big data word, but the problem is, how do you learn big data if you can't deal with the little data? Little data like the influenza and the pneumovax vaccination, where patients absolutely refuse to get their vaccines. So I use a lot of low-tech tools, journaling. I emphasize to every single resident that they must have, when they come and rotate with me and work with me in the clinic, they're doing the research projects, they must have a journal with them. I believe that that tool is extremely important, and without it, you really can't do much. The reason I say that is because you're always manipulating and making changes. And if you don't record what you're doing, you're going to forget 2 weeks later, and you really won't have any idea what's in your computer, what's all in your files, and what's going on. I also use a blackboard. Very old-fashioned thing. This is really my workhorse, that blackboard. When we sit on one-on-one, we use a lot of the blackboard. I'd love to get a smart board, but I can't tell you how much this is extremely useful. I wouldn't give it up even when I get the smart board. I'm going to shift to you again in some other tools as well. So I told you what my low-tech tools are, but here's my high-tech tool. This is something called R, an integrated development environment. R is a statistical software, and as you begin reading journals and looking at the methodology and statistics section, you're going to find a lot of people using R now rather than using SAS or SPSS. SPSS is simple. R is an integrated development environment. It begins teaching the residents how to think about solving problems from a computational point of view. Now, you may feel that this is this is too difficult. The fact is, we begin very simple, and you can do a lot of statistics in R by just one simple word, which is a function. You can do a chi-square test, a t-test, a mean, whatever you want. This stuff is really very easy if you sit with residents and you share with them simple things that they can use to actually provide them with the answers to the questions that they're asking. I also use another tool, mind maps. This is one of my residents who put this mind map for the NHANES data that is provided for free by the CDC. And it begins making sense. When you look at dictionaries, coding dictionaries for variables, they're very difficult to follow and understand. And mind maps are a very important tool that make that easy. Spreadsheets. We work on spreadsheets. I told you about the data types. Is it numerical? Is it an ordinal? Is it nominal variable? And we begin working with these and translate these into how R understands this stuff. And how should you actually be putting that spreadsheet together so that they, you know, the software, the application can automatically take that stuff in. When we talk about data, you have to ask questions. Very important skill. And that question that you ask, you have to think about what is my outcome variable and what is my predictor variable. And you have to figure out how to build these insights from doing simple visualizations in R. R gives you that capability very beautifully and very easily. So in summary, how do I do this? Our residents go every year. They have 4 weeks of research rotation. And we go through this, and these are some of my residents, Sary, Brian, and Hassan, and they come in and we do didactic sessions on a monthly basis as well as one-on-one sessions so that we can get this stuff taken care of. We flip the classroom. I've developed some videos and they take them, they look at them, and they come back and we try to figure out what is their gap, what do they understand, what do they not. But again, the most important thing is this stuff has to be relevant. They have to work on a project that they're assigned to, that they're interested in, so that they learn this stuff. Any questions?